I'm Paige Sharp, and on behalf of the Indiana Arts Commission, I'd like to welcome you to the FY22 Arts Project Support Application Workshop presented by our regional arts partners. We couldn't possibly provide such broad access to this important program without their help, and we are truly grateful for their dedication, commitment, and experience, which means that you are going to be in great hands today as you learn about this year's program. And with that, I invite Kayla Myers, our partner for Region 2, to get you started. Kayla?
Thanks, Paige. So for some general housekeeping announcements, we are recording today's webinar, which will be emailed to you later this week. We ask that all participants please mute themselves throughout the presentation, and questions can be typed into the chat box. We will also allow a few minutes for questions at the end of the presentation. And next slide, please. So if you need accommodations for this webinar, for the grant guidelines or the online application, please contact the IAC's Accessibility Coordinator, Stephanie Haynes, as shown on the screen. Live captioning is being offered during this webinar as well. You can turn on your captions in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen, and if you need help with captions or any accessibility, please send a private chat to Stephanie Haynes. So based on population, the IAC has divided our state into 11 different regions. Typically, these workshops are done at the regional level, but the pandemic provides an opportunity for all of us to work together. At the end of the presentation, we'll provide contact information for all of the regional arts partners so you can identify yours if you're not familiar. As Paige noted, I'm the regional arts partner from Region 2, and 2 other regional arts partners will be joining me today: Ann Fields Monaco from Region 4 and Heather Clausen from Region 3. The IAC's Grant Research and IT Manager, Deanna Polsma, will also be presenting the IAC's online grant system. So getting into the agenda, today we will be covering information about the FY22 Arts Project Support Grant Program. Specifically, we'll cover the program timeline, what's new this year, application information, evaluation criteria. Then we'll also view the online grant system, go through some grant writing tips, and we'll finish up with grant recognition and advocacy information. So Arts Project Support grants provide funding to Indiana arts and non-arts organizations to support a distinct aspect of the organization's arts activities, such as a one-time event, a single production, an exhibition, an educational seminar, or a series of related arts activities such as art classes or training sessions. This program provides grant awards up to $5,000 for arts projects by nonprofits. Please note that if you are an FY21 APS recipient who opted to extend your grant contract into FY22, you are not eligible for the FY22 program. There are a wide range of projects that take place across the state through this program. In the chat box, please feel free to type in your project name with a very brief description if it's not apparent from the project name, and I'll give you a minute to do so now. So again, if you can just type your project name into the chat box to share with others, and a very brief description if it's not apparent just from the name itself. Okay, it's like we're getting a few here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see those in the chat, the different programs that or projects that have been outlined so far. Okay, thank you all for sharing those. So hopefully seeing some of these projects gives you a sense of the variety throughout the state and some ideas for those of you that aren't as familiar with this program. There are many project possibilities, just to name a few, and I think some of these were up there. After school art programs, one-time events such as productions or festivals, art classes, concert series, and many others. If you have a question about whether a potential project is eligible for this program, please feel free to reach out to your regional arts partner. And again, we'll provide that contact information at the end of the presentation. So for the program timeline this year, for FY22, it's for projects taking place between the dates of July 1st, 21 and June 30th of 22. The deadline to request a draft application review from your regional arts partner is February 22nd, 21. This is optional. If you'd like to do this, it's not required. And then the application itself is due March 4th, 21 at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. We of course recommend that you submit a few days early. The evaluation panel to review your application will be in April. These do vary by region, and your regional arts partner will provide you with the specific date as it gets closer. And then the award notification will be sent in early July 21 through email. The first payment, 75% of your award amount, is typically deposited late September or early October. If all of your paperwork is turned into the IAC, and then your grant report will be due July 13th of 22, and then the final payment comes after that, after your report is submitted and reviewed. So what's new for this fiscal year? The IAC has not made any significant changes to the application compared to last year. However, there are a few changes to the program's funding priorities, evaluation criteria, and program guidelines. Most notably, the IAC has removed the one-to-one match requirement this year. This means that the granted funds can now be more than 50% of the project's cash income. The IAC has also established a new priority for funding that will support Indiana artists who are a vital part of our state's economy and community life. This means that one of the considerations for funding will be the extent to which an artist will directly financially benefit from the project and/or the extent to which the project will benefit artists. And before we take a look at the application, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to review the evaluation criteria that will be used to score your application.
Thank you, Kayla. Like Kayla said, before we get to the application questions and looking at the application in the online system, it is important to consider the context in which your application is going to be evaluated. And the reason I say this is because the Arts Project Support Program is an increasingly competitive grant opportunity. Therefore, I'm going to also share with you a few examples of how you can mindfully craft answers to the questions and maximize your potential score. I highly suggest you refer back to these evaluation criteria, which is available on the IAC's website as a PDF, and use it as a rubric for reviewing your grant application before you submit. And that part isn't too complicated, as the IAC has done a terrific job of formatting the application, so it aligns closely with each section of the evaluation criteria in the PDF. And they've also included the evaluation criteria at the beginning of each section, actually inside the application in the online grant system. So with the evaluation rubric that the panelists are going to be using, there are going to be 100 points possible, and to be eligible for funding, you must receive a minimum score of 75. Next slide. Thanks. The first section is the artistic quality section. This is worth 20 points, so it will be 20% of your total score. With consideration to the budget size of your organization, panelists will look at the extent to which your application demonstrates a committed effort to provide the audience a meaningful, impactful, and quality artistic or authentic experience. Now, the definition of meaningful, impactful, and quality can vary between panelists, so it is important to provide very clear explanations of what your organization plans to do, how it will execute that plan, and what the desired outcomes or impact will be. It is also important to note that the definition of quality is not to be confused with traditional definitions of highbrow versus lowbrow art forms. In other words, a performance of music from Star Wars isn't necessarily of lesser artistic quality than a concert full of Bach and Mozart. Panelists are looking for what your organization's end game is. So if you're wanting to introduce a new audience to the delightful sounds of your orchestra, Star Wars might actually be the better way to do it. So for the artistic quality scoring, it is important that you will communicate what you hope to accomplish with this project because you'll be scored accordingly. Panelists will specifically rate the application based on whether or not your application clearly demonstrates the artistic project and its purpose or goals. If this project has been done before, you will also want to be sure to demonstrate how your organization utilizes past experience to inform this year's project. In other words, you'll want to share how you're improving the project from the last time you did it. In this part of the application, you're going to be asked a very simple question. What is the purpose of this project? I would suggest making sure your answer is able to clearly answer the underlying questions of what are you going to do? With whom and for whom are you planning and implementing the project? Why are you going to do the project? How are the people going to participate in the project? And what will be the result of this project happening? In other words, what is your goal? A great example of an answer from my region, here up in Region 4, is from an arts organization, or just a nonprofit organization, sorry, that serves people without homes. Their project description was only 2 sentences long, yet it illustrates exactly what they do, what their goals are, and with whom they work. They wrote, Voices of Homelessness is an ongoing collaborative effort between our organization, clients, and artists in the community that shares the stories of people experiencing homelessness in Greater Lafayette. Through arts education, community presentations, and gallery shows, this project seeks to widen the conversation about homelessness in our community and the unique way that people experiencing homelessness view our city. So I think right there, it wasn't a super long answer to that number 1 question you'll be asked. But right away, they gave plenty of information in a concise format. Another 10% of your application score is going to be based on the project description and artistic documentation that you will use to demonstrate that the project will provide the audience a meaningful, impactful, and quality artistic or authentic experience. So you'll want to be able to offer information about the artists or ensembles or instructors you're hiring that are involved in the project. Be sure to include where they're from and how they will financially benefit, because as we mentioned, or we'll mention later on, that's a specific new criteria we've added. So you'll want to make sure, is there an honoraria or stipend in the project budget? Or in your goals, maybe one of your goals is to involve artists in some way that will benefit them. So be sure you're kind of weaving this throughout your answers in the application. You will want to use this as an opportunity to showcase the skills and expertise of the people you are working with to present your program. So you're going to be asked to provide samples of work from artists involved in the project, as well as maybe samples of past projects similar to what you propose. So again, if you've done this year after year, you probably have some really great content already saved and can easily upload it. But if you haven't done before, but you've done something similar, feel free to share that as well. And this will be like kind of an upload you just attach to your application. It'll be really easy. So like I just mentioned, artist support. The new criteria for the FY22 cycle is a reflection of the Indiana Arts Commission's recognition and support of the role individual artists play in our communities. 10% of your application's total score is going to depend on the extent to which an artist will directly financially benefit from the project, or the extent to which the project focus is to financially benefit artists. So be sure that your project budget clearly shows artist fees, or that your application narrative reinforces how the work is going to benefit artists. Next slide. Thank you, Chapin. Community engagement and ideas. So if you're a returning applicant, you're probably very familiar with the concept that a major chunk of your application score is going to be this community engagement section and your idea answers. Panelists are going to look at several criteria related to how you are going to involve your community in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the project. And now, before we really get into this, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that when we use the IDEA acronym, we're talking about the last kind of line on this slide. You see the inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. So that's what that acronym stands for if you aren't familiar with it. But in other words, so panelists are going to be looking for a two-way relationship between you and your community, as well as ways in which you are implementing inclusionary practices to increase diversity, equity, and accessibility. So this section of the application is going to ask you, who or what communities will this project serve? How will their input be included in the development and planning of the proposed project? What idea, strategies, and initiatives will be utilized in this project? And what tools and methods, such as surveys, town halls, social media, polls, how will that be utilized to measure the project's impact? And so again, these kind of 4 questions are just point blank in your application. If you don't remember what I just said, they're right there and they're the questions you actually have to answer. So your scoring though in this section is based on the panelist's viewpoint. It's based on the extent to which you're working with, not for, the identified communities you serve. So in your answer, again, you're going to say who you want to serve, and you'll also then include how is their input going to be included in the development and planning, as well as the evaluation of the proposed project. Next slide, thanks. So for this, you're also, or furthermore, I guess you should say, the applicant is going to be scored based on your demonstration of using intentionally idea strategies that increase access, address barriers, diversify participants, or provide accessibility accommodations for underserved communities. And again, underserved is often called under-resourced. And so that may not just be, people at a certain socioeconomic class in your community. It could be people who are, older, who maybe live in nursing homes, who don't have access to transportation. It could be, youth who are considered at risk. So all of these things, could be an underserved audience. Of course, rural communities in general are another good example. So they're going to want to see, though, how are you using these idea strategies to really provide a more accessible, be that, kind of physically accessible, or inclusion of people with different needs. And then lastly, you'll want to make sure you have kind of a clear process for measuring the project's impact. And again, that ties right into your initial goals that you'll have typed earlier in the application. You said what your goal is. So down in this community engagement and idea section, you have the opportunity to then say exactly how you're involving your community in evaluating the project's impact. And lastly, you'll want to upload an example of marketing materials or links to your social media that really reflects that you are trying to be inclusive in your design and promotion of this project. And I think actually with that, Heather Clausen from Arts United in Fort Wayne has a couple of community engagement examples that she'd like to share to kind of help elaborate a little more on what I've just been talking about. So Heather?
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everyone. Like she said, I'm Heather Clausen. I'm the Region 3, so Northeast Indiana Regional Art Partner. And today I have 2 really great examples that are at varying levels of the community engagement ladder, which is a great resource that the Indiana Arts Commission has provided for everyone. And these projects are at different points on that ladder, but really great examples of good community engagement. These were selected to highlight that thoughtful community engagement can be a part of any program, whether the program is brand new or has longstanding roots within your community. So the first one we'll take a look at is the drive-in experience at the Auburn Cord-Duesenberg Automobile Museum. This is a brand new program this past year, And they wanted to celebrate the creation of car culture with a real 1930s drive-in experience, sharing relevant movies that feature the Auburn Automobile Company's enduring cultural legacy. And this organization is located up in Auburn. They're in a rural community and they serve people of all ages year-round through a variety of programming, in addition to the museum being open year-round as well. So this program, like I said, is brand new, but in their application, they demonstrated examples of community engagement that they practice year-round and really showed us how it might be applied to their drive-in experience. So as you can see on the screen, they utilize surveys and feedback. They survey school groups, teachers, chaperones, and participants in other programs. And these surveys offer a comment field that allow for suggestions from all of their visitors and program participants. So they told us that this input has actually led to the creation of new programs and improvements. And this highlights that they're actually actively reading and involving the feedback from people who are participating with their organization's activities. One example of that is somebody said that they needed a more interactive exhibit, and they're actually in the process of developing a brand new exhibit here in the future. They also showed that they really involve their community by telling us about their core base of volunteers. While they have more than 45, those are the amount that on average volunteer weekly, and they actually facilitate meetings with these volunteers to gather their impact. And to help us understand the impact of their volunteers, they shared that they've spent nearly 9,000 hours in the museum in the past year alone. 50% of those volunteers were volunteers for over 10 years and 20% over 20 years. So these monthly meetings really show how the museum can better serve their community, as the volunteers are representatives of the community themselves. Now on the flip side, we have the Allen County Fort Wayne Historical Society Miami Indian Heritage Day series. This is a long-standing program. It's been around for about 13 years, and they offer monthly presentations featuring a different element of the Miami Indian heritage, history, and culture, including dancing, singing, drumming, beading, and much, much more. So as you can see, they've worked really hard to be as inclusive as possible, which has resulted in 90% of artists, 65% of volunteers, and 50% of attendees representing ethnic minorities in the community. They've been really intentional in their advertising. They offer 1 month of activities entirely for free and have made modifications to a national landmark to ensure that there's accessibility to the first floor and restroom of that building for when people attend programming. They have also ensured that all citizens of the Miami tribe and members of the Miami Nation receive free admission to all events. They also work with the Miami tribe continually throughout the year, engaging with them, and they have built longstanding partnerships throughout the presentation of this series. And like I said, that communication is ongoing before, during, and after each monthly event. They discuss everything that's happening during the day's events with presenters and interpreters. They reinforce what works and make plans to adjust or address any issues for the next month and year. And they collect feedback from attendees to better improve their program. So as you can see, that's on the higher end of the community engagement ladder, where they have taken many, many steps over the 13 years to build really intentional, two-way, meaningful community engagement. So don't worry if you're not there yet. Like we said, there is that ladder and everybody's at a different rung, and that is okay. We just wanted to share a couple of examples with you of some really outstanding community engagement. So with that, I'll pass it back to Anne.
Thank you for sharing those, Heather. Those were great. So the last section of your application, as well as the evaluation criteria, is the project management section. So this last part is where you're going to share with the panelists that the project is going to do what you say it is going to do, because you have awesome people engaged that will help make it happen. Panelists are going to score the extent to which you demonstrate the ability to successfully design and implement the project through effective planning, financial management, staffing, and evaluation. So if you have awesome program volunteers, now's the time to toot your own horn. In this section of the application, you're going to specifically be asked to provide information about who will help make the project happen, So in addition to like a general staffing or programs committee overview, you're going to want to include the title, role, responsibilities, and relevant experience of whoever's leading this project management. And lastly, you'll of course need to include a project timeline. Again, I know some of these things can be tentatives, but you're going to want to illustrate that you have a solid plan in place and that is not just going to suddenly appear out of nowhere. And in that timeline, be sure to include some time for evaluation. Are there follow-up focus groups or meetings that need to have happen after the project is ended? And then lastly, of course, the project budget, which I know kind of later on in the presentation, you're going to hear about a great workshop that will help you work on a project budget should you feel the need to do that. Next slide. So the scoring of the project management section is going to be based on these three things, that there's staffing to carry out the project. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be paid staff. It's just who is going to be leading this. And that the lead staff is appropriately experienced for the project. So again, if you're wanting to do maybe like an arts education thing, but you have someone who's only ever worked in the marketing field, you know, you may want to bring on another volunteer or leader on your team that has kind of that arts education experience. Again, this is just an example. But you'll want to, again, show how they're appropriately experienced for the type of project you're going to present. Again, you're typing out that kind of planning process and timeline, so that will be evaluated. The panelists will just look at it and make sure, you know, there's ample time to do things, and that, again, you've kind of considered all the different things that need to happen before, during, and after the project happens. And then lastly, you'll want to make sure that your financials can demonstrate capacity to implement the project and that your project budget is well considered and reasonable. And really, if you have specific questions about that budget form, I know some people get scared by numbers. That's a great opportunity to reach out to your regional arts partner, and they're more than happy to, you know, kind of walk you through more in depth with filling out that part of the section. So that is the evaluation criteria. And so next, I'd like to introduce the IAC's Grants, Research, and Information Technology Manager and knower of all things related to the online grant system, Deanna Poldma, to take a look at the actual application.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I am including a link here in the chat box for our online system while I get my screen sharing going. All right, so I'm going to share a couple different things. The first one is the login page. So let's say you are a first-time applicant, you've never applied before, your organization has never received funding, you're going to need to create a new account. It will walk you through all the steps. So just a few things to have on hand when you get ready to do this is going to be your organization's legal name. I know a lot of people go by a DBA. They might not be aware of the legal name. So make sure you know your organization's legal name, your EIN number, your DUNS number, website if you have one, phone number, mailing address are going to be some important information to have on hand to create that account. Let's say your organization has an account, has received funding in the past, but you've had some staff turnover and you're not sure how to get into the account. Recommend you reach out to your regional arts partner. They can update the information in the account, get you set up to get logged in. My email is also here over on the side as well. If you need to reach out to me for any technical issues, that's always available. All right, so then once you're in the system, you will go to what's called your dashboard. There are two main areas of the system, which is your dashboard and the apply page. So this is what you're going to see when you log in. You're going to see your organization's name, phone number, mailing address, as I mentioned, your information as the applicant who's going to be submitting the application. So if you log in and you're like, hey, this email address is out of date, or the mailing address, you know, we moved 3 years ago, you have the ability to edit this information. You just click on the little pencil icon and you can update that. If it gives you any trouble, just reach out to me or the partner and we can help you get that updated as well. You also have the option to look at past grant applications. So you'll notice down here there are two tabs. active requests and historical requests. So let's say you're a new grant writer for your organization. You can look at the historical requests tab and view the application that was submitted, and if it was awarded, how much it was awarded, so you can get a sense of what's been submitted in the past, what's worked, how it was scored. You can also reach out to your partner to get copies of panelist comments for those past applications as well, but they should be housed here in the application. So if you need help, just reach out. All right, so getting into applying. Up here, there's a little gray bar. You will click the apply page, and this will bring you to all of the open grant programs that the IAC has. So you'll notice we have 2. Everyone always asks about this access code bar here. You don't have to do anything with it. It's related to stuff we don't use, so don't worry about it. You're really going to just be looking at what's open. So we've got our arts organization support, and then down here, what we're talking about today, the arts project support. There are 2 things I want to call your attention to. One is the blue apply button up here on the right-hand side. And on the bottom left, we've got a preview. So let's say you just want to look at your application. You're not ready to fill it out, but you just want to see what it looks like. If you click on this, it will bring you into all of the different questions. And up here, you'll notice there's a question list PDF button. If you click on this, it'll generate a PDF that you can download and save. Now we have some people that click this preview button and they start filling it out, and then they have a moment of panic because it is not saved, because you've not clicked the actual apply button. You're in the preview button. So if you've realized that you've gone down that road, you accidentally clicked the wrong thing, but you still have the screen up, give us a call, because we can at least walk you through how to save your answers into a Word document to then paste over into the actual application. So these 2 buttons are going to be your best friend. This is the home icon is what takes you back to your dashboard. So I'm going to go back to that apply page, and I'm going to click apply. And so now we're in the actual application. At the top, there's a whole before you begin section. This has everything you need related to who to contact if you have questions, whether it's about the application or technical questions about the system you've got. It includes what we've already gone over about the evaluation criteria and how many points are associated with each section, draft reviews that are offered, when that deadline is. We've also got that you'll want to make note of the about the online system if you're new. So the system will auto save as you type. You don't have to hit save, though there is a save button all the way at the bottom. If you don't answer a question that's required, it will not let you submit your application. You'll get a red error message if you try and submit without actually completing the application. When it comes to uploading documents, you can only upload a single document. So let's say, and I'll get to it further down, you have multiple samples of work. You want to make sure you combine those into a single file and then upload, because if you try and upload one file and then upload the next example, it's just going to replace what you have already uploaded. So special thing to note. And once you do submit, the system will auto-generate an email to you letting you know that it's been submitted and it's come through. So you have that confirmation as well. So I'm going to go through, there is question branching in the application. So an example is if your project is fiscally sponsored, if you were to click yes, it opens up a section for you to complete further down about your fiscal sponsor. If not, you will never see it. So this would be one important part to note is when we were talking about that preview earlier, when you download the preview, if you download a PDF of the questions, you're going to get all of the questions, including ones that are question branched that might not apply to you. For example, your fiscal sponsor information if you don't have a fiscal sponsor. Important notes for each question we've included in green to call it out and bring it to your attention. Anything in blue is going to be a link for you. So an email, a checklist, things of that nature. So as I mentioned before, the system auto saves as you type. So I can move on to the next one and it'll just save as I go. I don't have to click anything. Every time I type into one box and click out into another, it saves. So I talked about some of the links. Before it was mentioned, the evaluation criteria is in the application. So this is an example of where you can see we're in the artistic quality and artist benefit section, exactly what you're being scored on and the points associated with it and the questions that it's related to directly below it. So it's all housed right there together for you in one spot. And so this is an example of where you'll upload your artistic work sample. So we've got a note here about uploading multiple files. It needs to be a single one. We've also got a note about, let's say you're a performing arts organization or you're putting on a performance project of some sort and you want to submit videos. There, you'll notice there's the text box here for you to include links if you wanted to include video samples rather than visual samples of work. You can put those links here in the text box instead of uploading a file. We ask that you do that because if you were to, let's say, create a PDF and put in your link in that PDF and upload the PDF, the evaluators can't click on the link. So if you include it here in this text box, they have the ability to click on the link. So that is why that is there for you. If you felt like you need to explain part of your sample of work that's uploaded, that's there for you as well. Going down some more, I wanted to show you an example of what happens if I tried to submit without filling everything out down here at the bottom. So I referenced there's a save application button. If you just like to be overly cautious, you can hit save and it'll do that for you. And it'll tell you everything that you haven't answered when you do that. I'm gonna go ahead and hit continue. So if I hit submit, I get a big red box and it lists everything that's not been answered within the application. And if I scroll through the application, the questions that aren't answered are also highlighted in red. So let's say you get this box and it's just maybe one little line and you're like, oh, I can't figure out what I didn't fill out. Where's it at? Just know that you can scroll through and look for that red box and that will help show you what was missed on your way through. The next part I wanted to mention was if you're completing an application, you need to step away and come back to it. That's no problem. Once you've started filling out an application, it automatically appears on your dashboard. So I hit that little home button, went back to my dashboard so you can see it saved because I started typing in some of the fields. All I have to do is click this edit application button to the right and it'll take me right back where I left off. Let's see. There's another feature that I didn't mention. If you are a returning grantee, you've written this grant in the past, and you would like to start off with using what you wrote last year as your template to start filling out the application from. Up here, there is a copy previous answers blue button. If you click that, it'll show you past grant applications that you filled out and allow you to select one to then copy forward. Because I've not done that for here, it's probably not going to let me and I probably froze it. So let's refresh. Okay, but anyways, if that's something you wanted to do, you could. You would just copy previous answers, you would click FY21 and it'd copy forward associated questions for you and your responses. There's also a collaborate feature. I tend to not encourage people to use this because things can go wrong fast if you're not sure what you're doing. But essentially, this feature is to, let's say you're writing the grant, but your bookkeeper is going to fill out the financial section of the application and you have nothing to do with it. You can click collaborate and type in their email address, send them a little, because it's going to send them an email. Send them a little message if you want, like, hey, I've got this submitted. Can you fill this out and submit it? Everything else is good to go. Just need you to do your section. Type that little message Over here on the right-hand side, this is what I talked about can make things go a little haywire, is you have to tell them what you want them to do. So if you want someone to just proofread it, you can give them viewing only permissions. If you want them to proofread and edit, you can do that, and then you're still going to be the one to submit. Or you can say, I'm done. I want you to look it over, edit, press the final submit button. You can do that as well and hit invite. So that is what that feature does, and you can just send it back and forth between people that way. Once you've submitted your application, you'll notice there's this application packet button. You can click this and it will pull down a PDF of the application and all of your responses for you to save at the end if you would like. And so in order to do that, again, you would just go from your dashboard to the edit application, and it's going to be here on the right hand side when you first pull up the application. And I believe that's all I've got for you guys. Does anyone have any specific questions about the system I did not share?
We had one in the chat box about if there was a free PDF combiner that you would recommend.
Oh, I believe we have it linked here in the application. Let me scroll down. Apparently we didn't. We have this information elsewhere. I'll pull it and I'll make sure we link it here and for you, and I'll get it included in the chat here as well in just a few moments.
Awesome. Thank you, Deanna. All right, so I'm gonna jump back on here, and we're just gonna share with you guys a few grant writing help and resources. So one of my favorite and the most unique perks about the Indiana Arts Commission grant process is the feedback that you get every year. As a grant writer myself, I value feedback, and I know that a lot of other foundations and organizations don't provide that anymore. So if you're a returning applicant and you want your panelist comments from a past grant, just let your regional art partner know. We can get those to you. They may already be in your system. And we also, I believe, should have recordings available from the live panels last year as well. So you can reach out and we can get that information to you. Additionally, it's always helpful to have additional eyes on your application. So one of the things that is offered is that application review that was mentioned earlier. Just let us know when your draft is ready. And you can request this anytime before February 22nd. In addition to this, I also encourage you to have somebody who might not be familiar with your program review your application. It's really important for everybody to remember that your panelists only know what's placed in your application. They might not know anything about your program or even your organization. They might not even be from your region of the state. So having those outside eyes is always beneficial to make sure that what makes sense in our brains translates accordingly to the page. The additional tips that I'll offer that most of them were mentioned before, but I feel they're important to reiterate, is to be very cautious and pay attention to those character counts. Every answer is going to come with a unique character count. They're not the same across the board. And if you're like me, I know I work in an external Word document, and just because I count the characters in Word, it doesn't always translate exactly into the system. So just make sure that if you are working in an external document, that you're not waiting until the last minute to paste it over and, ooh, I'm 100 characters over. Make sure that you're going back and forth to stay under that character limit. And the purpose of that, as Anne mentioned, is to encourage conciseness. With the example that she gave before, you see that it can be really easy to describe your program in a really short and concise way. And then that frees up extra characters and extra space to share a little bit more about what you're doing. So the more concise you can be, oddly, the more information you can fit. And there's a general grant writing tip hyperlinked in this presentation. So when you get it, you'll be able to link to that document. But they have a line in there that I like. It says, longer doesn't necessarily mean stronger. So say what you mean to say and move on to the next question is my motto with the grant application process. And as Deanna said, the system does autosave, but I always encourage applicants to still hit that save button because you can see that list of what's left to do, but then you just have that extra peace of mind knowing that everything is saved. Finally, the IAC has been doing an amazing job over the past year at building their webinar collection. And so we encourage you to take advantage of this resource. There are many webinars specific to things that could be applicable to the art project support grant, such as making in-person events work. I know this next grant cycle will start July 1st, and that might still be an iffy period. So maybe that webinar will help you. There's a webinar about art and accessibility for all, which is great for us to consider at all times when looking to dive deeper into idea work. And there's many, many more webinars on there. So I encourage you to check out that resource. You'll also find the recent webinar with Nina Simon located there, which was re-envisioning relevance to become of, by, and for all, which really, if you haven't seen it, is a great webinar. So I encourage you to check it out. Next, as previously mentioned, there is a free webinar next week that the IAC will be hosting. And it's going to be highlighting best practices when it comes to creating an arts project budget. So if you are somebody who's applying for this grant and you're not quite sure what shouldn't be included, how to craft the perfect budget, numbers aren't your thing, that's okay. That's why this webinar is being offered. So it will define some key terms such as match and in-kind, although that should be a little bit easier this year now that there's not a match requirement for the APS grant. But as you can see, the link to register is hyperlinked in this slide. It can be found on that same webinar page previously mentioned, or it can be obtained from whoever your regional arts partner is. And finally, the next little bit is about grant recognition and advocacy. This information, if you're awarded a grant, will come along with the grant award, but it's always worth mentioning up front. Providing funding credit to the IAC and to your regional arts partner will be a requirement of receiving your grant. It lets the audience know about the government support for cultural experiences, and it's a great opportunity to thank your political leaders and taxpayers for their support. We also encourage you to continue inviting legislators to your events, acknowledging them when they're there, and offering them a chance to speak when they attend, if it's possible. And if you're interested in getting more involved with advocacy during the legislative session and beyond, we encourage you to check out the Indiana Arts Advocates page and sign up for updates from advocacy chairs Sally Gaskell and Terry Whitt-Bailey. So with that, we highly encourage you to connect with your regional art partner. If you're not sure what program to submit for, if you have questions about specific pieces of the applications, we are here to be a resource for you. Several of us have also opened up virtual office hours, which again will be hyperlinked in this presentation when you receive that. You can email them directly, and if you know who your rep is already, you probably know exactly how to get a hold of them, whether it's by phone or email, or when the world opens back up again, just walking into their office. So just know that we're here to be a resource for you and continue to provide assistance. So with that being said, I just want to preemptively thank you all for joining us today, but we are going to take a look at the questions in the chat box and hopefully get some answers for you. So let me scroll back here. So we have a question that says, I've not applied for the APS grant before, but have received an on-ramp fellowship, which was used for a successful project. I would like to use the APS grant to complete other very similar projects. Should I make reference to the previous grant received? I will let somebody else jump in after I say, I think that would make it a much stronger application. You're showing proof of a successful project. But if there's anybody from the IAC who wants to tackle that, I'm not sure who we have.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, Heather, I got distracted by an email.
No worries. Somebody received an on-ramp fellowship that was used for a successful project, and they're interested in applying for APS. to complete another similar project. So should they reference the on-ramp fellowship in their grant application?
Absolutely. I think it would strengthen the application because they've already done it. It's been, so they have experience. And then they can also communicate how they factored in things that they learned in order to improve this new project that they intend to provide.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
We have a question. Is there a place online where we can access last year's panelist comments? This answer will vary per region. I know up in Region 3, I do upload comments into the portal. Some people prefer if you just email them, they can get those to you. So if you don't see them in the online grant system, I just encourage you to reach out to your regional art partner and they can get those to you. Next question, a question that asks about the total number of people involved in the project. Does that include the number of attendees you expect to attend, or is this just the people involved in the organization? Does it include the artists involved? Paige.
Do you want me to tackle that one?
Yeah, you disappeared from my screen. I wasn't sure.
I know. Oh, you were looking for me. I was like, well, she can answer that.
You're back.
Okay. So who do you count? It count everybody who was directly involved with the project. So let's say that you had a committee of folks and you had somebody from your board and you had a couple staff and 3 people from the community and a couple artists, and they met, 3 or 4 times. They were directly involved in that project development. We also want to see the folks who, participated in the actual activities as well. So participation is sort of at every level. It doesn't mean because you have other staff in your organization who had nothing to do with the project, you don't count them. You just have anybody that was actively involved in some way. Now we're talking about like physically in person, which is really weird during a pandemic, right? Because we are meeting oftentimes electronically. So we also continue to keep that field where you can talk about, electronic participation, but we give this information to the National Endowment for the Arts, and they do want the actual physical participation figures. So let's say that you had all these meetings online, and then you had the actual activity in person. It would be only the in-person folks that participated that would be counted.
Great, thank you, Paige.
Sure.
Sticking on this virtual trend, somebody last year, their project went virtual and they resubmitted their application. Like everyone else, they're on the fence about how it's going to happen in the fall, and they want to know how they can reflect that proactively in this application.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you've already gone through this thinking, so if you, in the application you say, this is our intention, we want to host it live. However, we also have an alternative plan to put it online should we need to, if the pandemic persists and the audience feels more comfortable to participate online only. Or maybe you'll have some sort of hybrid plan. But the fact that you're thinking about it is a definite value add.
Thank you. I know this one was answered in the chat, but I'll just answer it out loud as well. Will we get to see the scores when looking at the application review? And the answer is no. The scores go through a funky normalization process, and by the end of the day, they don't make much sense. So it's not something that's available for your view, but we are pleased to provide you with the written comments and feedback that hopefully can help shape your application for future years. You'll also find in the chat that Deanna shared the PDF merge site. That's a great one. And then I'll just also throw in there, I usually just Google it and I use each one until my free uses for the for the day or the month or the week are up. So you can also use that if you run out of free merges on one site. If somebody who says, I've received conflicting panelist comments in the past regarding whether to show the full project budget or just the component that this grant funding will cover, what is the actual preference?
You know, that's what this, I'm going to give you the most annoying response in the world, and it depends. I think the budget that you want to provide is the one that makes the best case for your application. I would strongly encourage you to talk to a regional arts partner, and if they're not able to provide you the guidance, then I'm happy to do it separately, because if it's a massive budget, then and the project is a small component, but there's still a lot of dollars involved, then and it has a lot of moving parts, then it's really best to focus on that. The key thing is that it needs to be within the grant period, and sometimes larger projects are outside of the grant period. So we can have a little bit more in-depth discussion. I would say if it's a fairly small project, $50,000 wide, and the actual activities that the funds are going to go to are a fairly good part of it, then the whole budget makes sense. But again, it's one of those it sort of depends situations. And be advised that panelists don't always agree. That is definitely a commonality, and we don't really provide I think great clarification because of the it depends situation. So great question, wish I could be more direct.
Paige, I'm going to pass this next one to you too, because it has to do with that new criteria section pulled out. How can you make a distinction, or do you make a distinction between artists and arts educators when looking at the financial benefit to artists in the community?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So we really want to focus on artists, and it doesn't mean that an arts educator isn't always an artist, but sometimes an arts educator isn't also an artist. So it's really, we want to be very clear support for artists. 95% of artists in the state were negatively impacted by COVID-19 because many of them are portfolio artists. They just did not get the revenue that they're used to. So an arts educator artist is usually someone who teaches in community centers, and part of their portfolio career is providing some sort of education service. But that's very different from, say, an art teacher in a classroom. So we're really looking at artists to support them directly. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Somebody asked about the final grant report, if you have to fill it out before reapplying, even though the deadline is after. The answer is no. The grant cycle is that July 1 to June 30th. So some of you guys do have projects that fall after the grant application deadline and before the final, before that grant cycle is over. So once your project is complete, go ahead and fill out that final grant report, but no, you don't have to do it before applying. Also, to answer this question, if you have an operating support grant from the Indiana Arts Commission, no, you cannot also apply for an art project support grant. It is one or the other. What if we are planning to use the funds for a program in the fall, winter, and the pandemic prevents us from moving forward? Should we determine another use that still fits the criteria or notify our rep at that time? I think that is one where we're stuck in a pandemic and we are very understanding of the fact that things are in flux and continually changing. So as things like that come up, just reach out to your regional arts partner and they'll work with you on a case-by-case basis to figure out what the next steps are going to be. What about when we do public discussions and explanations of the project? Are those interacting with us in a presentation then added to the participation number? Yes, I'm seeing head nods.
Yeah, I would say yes, because they're directly involved in providing information that you'll be utilizing for your project.
Great.
As long as it's in person, of course.
Awesome. This might be a Deanna question. An organization didn't have a new grant last year because our grant was bumped to this year because of COVID. Is the grant we submitted last year still retained in the system? It was withdrawn and not evaluated. So can they still find access to that?
Yep. It'll be, since it is closed out, it'll be under the historical request side, but they will have the option to read it, and if they wanted to copy forward answers from last year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know we have a few other questions coming in, but I do want to be respectful of our time because we did just hit 3 o'clock. So What I would encourage you to do, I believe we'll have access to the questions in the chat. So if you have a last minute question, go ahead and punch it in there, or we encourage you to reach out to your regional arts partner directly, and we'll be happy to help get some of those questions answered for you. So I will go ahead and just say, on the behalf of the regional arts partners and the Indiana Arts Commission, thank you guys so much for joining us today for our art project support grant workshop. We hope that we help to explain the application process to you a little bit more thoroughly, and encourage you to reach out with any additional questions and thoughts that you may have. And just want to thank you guys for all the great work that you guys have been doing over the past year. It's been a crazy time, and we're looking forward to see what you guys have coming next. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.